Hey, Frank and Arlo. Greetings again from now the Mediterranean Sea. We just got in here today. We had a very eventful morning, passing through what used to be called the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Rock of Gibraltar. It's kind of in Spain, but it belongs to England. And on the other side, the African side, there are two possible rocks that are the other pillar. I forget what they're called right now, but they don't know which is the real one and which isn't. Although neither of them are really real. So today I want to tell you about my Aunt Thelma. Although you would get in big trouble if you called her Thelma. This is somebody that your fathers knew very well and loved a lot. I was thinking about this series of videos today, and I'm going to post them on Facebook. I'm going to invite everybody in the Clark family and the McConnell family. So that's my family and my ex-wife's family. That's your grandmother McConnell. Her last name is Clark, but she's the McConnell side of the family. She just never got married again and gave up my name. You even have an aunt and maybe one uncle who have the name Clark, but they're not my children. They're children that she had afterwards. So any of them, I want them to weigh in. Maybe I don't remember things exactly the way that they remember them, and maybe they have something to add. Maybe they just want to share something about either the person that I've talked about in the video or about something that might have nothing to do with the video but could be helpful to you two guys. And also to them. I mean, some of these people knew some of the folks that we're talking about. I knew all of them. When I get back home, I'm going to talk to you about somebody who I didn't know, who signed the Declaration of Independence and we're related to through my dad. And that's a guy named John Hart. But other than that, I'm going to talk to you about people that I knew well enough to know a story that could last maybe 20 minutes on them. But today I'm going to talk about my Aunt Thelma Weber, Thelma June Weber. And this is my real aunt. This is not a great aunt. I had two other aunts. They were married to my brother, my father's brothers. They were people that I called aunt. I don't even remember their names. One of them was Madeline, but we weren't real close to the Clark side of the family. My Uncle Bill and my Uncle Bud. I don't even remember what Bud's real name was. It might have been George. But we just didn't know them. They seemed like nice enough people, but my mom kind of didn't like them, and that happens sometimes. You grow away from parts of your family because of marriage. But sis, she never married. That's what she was called her whole life. And she was the sister of my mother, so she called her sis. And my grandparents, Nan and Grandpa Weber, called her sister. Sister, come here. I hear it like it was yesterday. She was a very interesting lady. She worked at a file factory, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I kind of call this the life lived vicariously. She, like I said, never got married. She never really traveled anywhere. And she lived in the same house almost her entire life, which I'll talk about when she moved out of that house. She was in her 60s by the time she moved out of the house that she was born in. Now, there may have been times before my grandparents bought that house that she lived someplace else with them, but she lived with my grandparents. Then eventually they died and she lived by herself. She had a running battle with your great-grandpa, or I'm sorry, with your great-nana. When one of them bought something, the other one bought the same thing. One example that your fathers will remember, and they probably remember more than this, but I won't get into it. A lot of times it was furniture. One of them would buy a certain piece of furniture and the other one would go, oh, that's beautiful, I need to have that. And they would get the exact same thing. There used to be these beautiful oval mirrors in the bedrooms on York Street and eventually down in Stone Harbor. But there was another one at Sister's house. And Grandma and they eventually inherited those. We had both of them, so probably until we moved from Miami, we had one of them, but it didn't make the move. Maybe it is in our house in Jacksonville Beach, but I don't think so. I mentioned that Sis, and your father's called her Sissy, that Sis never married. She had a boyfriend. It was a guy named Herbie. Herbie went away to defend the country in World War II. He was on a submarine called the Tang. It was torpedoed and sunk by the Japanese, maybe? I forget who sunk it, but one of the enemies of the country sank it, and he died at the bottom of the ocean, and she just never, ever recovered from that. She had newspaper clippings and stuff, and in fact, I had them. I don't think they've made all the moves with us, but I had them at one point in time, talking about the Tang submarine going down. Now, when she worked at the file factory, I think she was an assistant manager when I was younger. I eventually worked at that same file factory, so I knew some of the same people that she would talk about all the time. People like Polak Rose and Italian Rose. Back then you could say things like Polak and people wouldn't get pissed off, because that's how you told the difference between the two roses. But one in particular was a guy named Wally Brando. Wally was her boyfriend, and I think he was a married man. At least that's what the rumor had. But that was her boyfriend, but nobody knew it, except at one time I caught them making out at my grandparents' house. She started working at that file company probably back around the Second World War. It was on Frankfurt Avenue, Nicholson File. And she worked there forever and ever. And then they moved. They built this brand new place up on, it was not far from Roosevelt Boulevard in Northeast Philadelphia, way up, kind of close to Byberry Road, almost outside of Philly. That's where I worked. I never worked at the old factory on Frankfurt Avenue. I think it was near Girard Avenue. And she had to get up earlier and get on public transportation and go there. And we're talking about somebody who walked everything. My mother went to girls' high school, so she had to take public transportation to the school. Sis went to Kensington High School. It was maybe 3 blocks from where she lived. So she didn't really need to travel anyplace except to come to Stone Harbor to hang out with us, which she did quite often. And then somebody drove her down there. She never drove. A lot of people in our family never drove. But she had to get up and take that bus and probably like 3 different forms of transportation to get there. She did that for several years, but then they moved again. They moved down to Alabama. And everybody thought, oh, this is really cool. She's going to move down to Alabama. I think it was maybe Coleman, Alabama. But she decided to retire. And well, she had some problems in her life. She had a drinking problem. She had a lot of time on her hands. And she started to deteriorate. I was down there visiting her after I had left the grandmother, McConnell. I took the 2 boys with me, your fathers, and I didn't completely take them. They spent an awful lot of time with their family in Bristol. I had a ton of help raising your fathers. I had your great-grandmother Gertrude and your great-nan, my mom. They were a ton of help. And sometimes they would spend time with their mother. I didn't completely keep them away from them, but there were things that happened that don't matter. There are reasons why I decided that I needed to have them with me. And I wound up having them in Kensington on York Street, 2176 East York Street. They went to private, I think a Lutheran school for a while. And then they went to Hackett School, which is the same school that I went to. And I believe that my parents both went to Hackett Elementary School. It was right across the street from where we lived on York Street, and it was kind of around the corner from where I grew up on Dauphin Street. And we had a babysitter. Her name was Teresa. She was a pretty cool kid. She was somebody that Judy, my girlfriend, who I moved in with, had used for a long time as a babysitter. She had this biker boyfriend. She was a little rough around the edges, but she was cool. She was a nice person. And she was a good babysitter. For some reason, she became unavailable, and we were trying to find a solution to the babysitter problem. We didn't have a lot of room. We had a 3-1 at 1303 Hellerman in Northeast Philadelphia. I think the neighborhood was called Castor Gardens. And there were 5 kids and me and Judy. So one day I said to Judy, hey, why don't we invite my aunt to come live here? Because when you have 7 people living in a house with 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, why not invite another, not just another person, but another adult, and one with some special needs? And she said, sure, let's try it out. And Sissy moved in with us. And it turned out to be really good. She needed somebody to watch over her and the 5 kids. So we're talking about, because I really didn't talk too much about the Mathers, we're talking about Alex, the oldest boy, who was almost the same age as Frank. And then you had Becca, who, Frankie, you met at your father's memorial service at Sam's house, at Uncle Sam's house. And Jimmy, who now lives in New Orleans. I think Alex lives in San Francisco, Becca still lives in Philly, and I hope you get to meet these people. So they were the kids. They all went to the same high school the same grade school in the neighborhood there. Carnell, I think was the name of the school. So they all got to walk to school together, and it's a pretty cohesive family. But we moved Sissy into the middle of this, and she watched them, and they watched her. She reinvented herself. She still was wearing all the same clothes. She never went clothes shopping after she stopped working at the factory. So she wore clothes for however many years that was, and never thought, hey, let me go to a store and get something new. So she started to go clothes shopping on Castor Avenue in a very Jewish neighborhood. She wound up looking like an old Jewish lady. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's just the type of fashion. So she looked kind of, as Judy would say, she was off and pitched out. And she also, in a roundabout way, although she never planned this, I was the one, with Judy's okay, who planned this whole thing, usurped my mom. My mom was very, very involved in your father's lives. And even when I moved them out of the house on your street into the house on Hellerman Street, we'd spend a lot of time with my parents. They spent a real lot of time with my parents, and even the Mather kids would spend time. Sometimes my parents would go out to dinner, and if they were taking Frank and Tom, they would take the Mathers too. They would also take your cousins. I guess they're your cousins. My brother will know exactly who her kids are. You have relatives, my brother's kids. They're the cousins of your dad. So I guess they're your second cousins. But there's some sort of a thing that you do, and I don't know exactly what it is. But he knows all that. Your Uncle Richard is the family resident genius, we'll say. He knows all the things that you don't necessarily need to know, but they're good to know. He knows that. So that's Lisa, Stephen, and Scott. I'm going to invite your great Uncle Richard to maybe do a couple videos about them, so that you'll get to know who they are, and I'm hoping you'll get to know who they are in person, in real time. At one point in time, and nobody knows if it's true because nobody saw this guy, but Sissy, your dad's Aunt Sissy, had a boyfriend. She would come home and tell these stories that were like almost bizarre about this guy, things that he would say and things that he would do, and it was like, oh, she's got a boyfriend. But she would disappear. When we were there, she could do whatever she wanted. She was free to go out and do what she wanted to do. She was ambulatory and reasonably healthy, so she would leave the house and not come back for several hours. So everybody assumed that she really had a boyfriend. At some point in time, we moved from 1303 Hellerman to, I believe it's 1225 Folkrod Street in Frankfurt. And the kids went to different schools down there. Tom went to a different school than Frankie, I'm pretty sure. And I forget, I think the Mathers went to the same school that Tom went to. But Sis moved there with us, and she wound up getting her own room, which she had her own room on 1303 Hellerman Street, but it was just a little, it was almost just like a closet. It was the third bedroom. We got a fairly large house on Folkrod Street, and we all moved in there. And I like to say we all lived happily ever after, and I guess we did to a certain extent, but she got cancer and wound up going into the hospital. She wasn't in there that long, and she passed away. And I remember the last time that I was talking to her, she was telling me about watching the squirrels climbing in the trees outside of her window, and I'm like, well, where did you go? Did you walk over to the window? And she said, no, just lying here in bed. See him out there? Well, she was on the 7th floor or something of this hospital. So these must have been flying squirrels or very, very large trees. And I remember her funeral. Now, yesterday I told you about Anita's funeral. Today I'm going to tell you about Sis's funeral. It was a little bit different. I gave a speech there about her as a sailor, because Herbie was a sailor, and how she decided to sail the world solo. I don't remember the speech as much as I do the one for Anita, because hers was based on a Bible verse, and I remember that because of the Bible verse. But I just remember saying that it was a pleasure having her in our lives at the end of her life for a few years. It gave her purpose, and it helped us out immensely. It saved us a lot of money. It gave some structure to the family that having a bunch of babysitters didn't. And there were times when we would have to leave the boys with a neighbor. There was this Indian couple that had a couple little girls that we would leave them with. That's a story for another day. It was a lot of fun, and they came home smelling like curry, and their fingers were stained from eating Cheetos. So when I was done my little talk that I was asked to give, my son Frank said that, and he had brought his soprano saxophone. He said that he was going to play. And I said, okay. What are you going to play? He said, well, I'm not going to tell you. It's something that Sis asked me to play at her funeral. I thought, oh, that's great. It's going to be a hymn. So I got Frank to get up, and he played Georgia on My Mind. And at the end of it, I went up and said, Frank, I didn't know that my Aunt Thelma had a Georgia connection. What's her connection to Georgia? Why did she ask you to play Georgia on My Mind at her funeral? And he said, oh, it's the theme song of Designing Women. which is a TV show based in, I think, Atlanta. That was something that she watched all the time. So even in that, she lived her life vicariously, and I miss her. Like I miss all the people that I've been telling you about. So anyway, guys, peace out. Won't be giving a couple of these because we're stopping in a port in Spain, then a port in France, then a port in Italy, and then we disembark in Rome. About 2 days after that, we'll be in Barcelona, and I'll be checking in on you, not you, checking in on you there.